In the ancient days of Israel, under King Saul's reign, a shadow of terror loomed. Not drought or plague, but a formidable enemy threatened God's chosen people. The Valley of Elah, a peaceful place, was about to witness a legendary confrontation. Two vast armies stood defiantly facing each other, poised for battle. On one side, the forces of Israel with gleaming armor. On the other, the fearsome Philistines. The tension was palpable as both sides waited for the decisive moment. The instant when the fate of a nation would be forged in battle. While tensions mounted in the Valley of Elah, life went on in Bethlehem. There, a young shepherd named David diligently tended his father's sheep. His worth lay not in his stature or position, but in his connection with the divine. David did not wield a sword or wear armor. His hands were accustomed to the lyre and the crook. But his heart beat with unwavering faith, a warrior of the spirit. One day, David's father, Jesse, gave him a task: to carry supplies to his brothers. David was walking toward a destiny planned for him long before his birth. Upon reaching the Israelite camp, David heard the thunderous cry of Goliath. The giant hurled insults that echoed throughout the valley. Fear etched on the faces of Israel's soldiers. To David, this was an intolerable offense against God. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?" David exclaimed with conviction. Some soldiers mocked him, thinking it madness. Eliab harshly rebuked him, accusing him of pride. Despite the criticism, David's determination was unwavering. News of his courage reached King Saul. Brought before King Saul, David showed no fear. With a conviction that surprised everyone present, he declared, "Do not let your heart fail you." The monarch looked at the young man in disbelief. But David, undeterred, recounted how he faced dangers as a shepherd. He declared, "This Philistine will be like one of them." Saul offered him his royal armor, but it was a hindrance. David took it off. He only needed his faith and his sling. With calm determination, David descended into the stream. He took 5 not because he doubted God, but because he was wise. With these simple items, David approached the battlefield. On the other side, the towering figure of Goliath watched him advance. Goliath sneered, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" David answered with firmness that silenced both armies. These were the words of a man who fought for the glory of his God. The giant Goliath, shouting curses, began his advance. It was the sound of an invincible monster approaching, paralyzing an entire army. But David, far from retreating, did the unthinkable. He ran toward him. With lightning speed, David reached into his shepherd's bag. The stone flew through the air like a projectile propelled by heavenly fire. The impact was devastating. Goliath staggered, collapsing with a roar. David rushed toward the fallen giant, cutting off his head. A shout of victory rose from Israel's camp, drowning out disbelief and fear. The Philistines witnessed the fall of their champion and fled in terror. Victory was not due to a mighty warrior or a vast army. It was the victory of a young man, a shepherd, a courageous worshiper with only faith. The battle was not his, it was the Lord's. David didn't just defeat a giant, but overcame disbelief that paralyzed a nation. His act of faith left a legacy. When God is with you, no giant can stand. After the stunning victory over Goliath, young David was brought before King Saul. His destiny would be intertwined with that of Prince Jonathan, the king's son. Jonathan's soul was united with David's, and he loved him as his own. He saw in David not only a hero, but a kindred spirit. Jonathan made a covenant with David, a covenant of unbreakable friendship. He removed his robe and gave it to David, along with his armor, sword, bow, and belt. It was an act of total surrender, a recognition of David's greatness, a symbol of his eternal loyalty. From that day on, David served King Saul with wisdom and success. His victories won him the favor of the people and the king's servants. David was acclaimed, his fame growing with each feat. But David's favor kindled a dangerous flame in Saul's heart. Returning from battle, the women sang, "Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s." These words wounded Saul's pride, making him angry. From that day on, Saul viewed David with suspicion and envy. Saul's envy soon turned into a dark obsession. The next day, an evil spirit seized Saul. David played the harp to soothe the king's torment. Saul's hand grasped a spear, blinded by jealousy. Saul threw the spear, aiming to pin David to the wall. David dodged it twice, divinely protected. Saul, now fearing David, made him commander. This only made David prosper even more. Despite Saul's attempts to get rid of David, the young man always acted wisely. Seeing David's continued success, Saul proposed giving him his eldest daughter Merab. But in his heart, Saul thought, "Let it be the hand of the Philistines." However, when the time came, he gave Merab to Adriel of Mahola. Later, Michal fell in love with David, making Saul pleased yet suspicious. Saul offered an unusual dowry, 100 Philistine foreskins. David, without hesitation, accepted the challenge. David boldly sets out to pay the dangerous price for the dowry. Instead of 100, David returned with 200 Philistine foreskins for King Saul. Saul realized the Lord was with David, and his fear grew even more. Saul had to give his daughter Michal to David as a wife. This union, born from a ploy, became a blessing for David. Saul's animosity toward David grew even more implacable. Saul's fury against David continued unabated. It grew day by day. The king spoke to Jonathan and his servants about killing David. Jonathan's love for David was stronger than any blood ties. Jonathan warned David about the imminent danger. Jonathan interceded for David with wisdom and courage. He reminded Saul of David's good deeds and victories. Saul swore that David would not die, appeasing his spirit. Jonathan brought David back to Saul, restoring the bond. But the peace in Saul's heart was short-lived. War broke out again, and David went to fight the Philistines. David's success only fanned the embers of envy in Saul's soul. An evil spirit from the Lord took hold of the king. In a moment of uncontrolled fury, the king hurled the spear. David, alerted by divine providence, moved away. He fled the king's house that same night. The same night David fled, Saul sent messengers to watch him and kill him. But Michal, David's wife, loved her husband and was determined to save him. With wit and quick thinking, she warned him, "If you do not save your life tonight, you will be killed." Without wasting a moment, Michal helped David climb down through a window. Then, Michal placed an idol in the bed, covering it with a blanket. When Saul's messengers arrived, she said, "He is sick." Discovering the idol, Saul was furious and confronted Michal. Michal, with her love and ingenuity, bought David the time he needed to escape. David, fleeing Saul's relentless pursuit, arrived in Ramah to meet Samuel. Together, David and Samuel went to Naioth, a dwelling place for prophets. Saul sent messengers to arrest David, but they began to prophesy. Saul learned of this and sent more messengers, who also prophesied. Finally, Saul himself, obsessed, went to Ramah. On his way, the Spirit came upon Saul, and he too began to prophesy. He fell flat on the ground before Samuel, proving the power of the Lord. David fled Naioth and confronted Jonathan, filled with anguish. He asked, "What have I done? What is my guilt?" Jonathan, unaware of Saul's obsession, reassured him. David swore, "There is but a step between me and death." Jonathan asked, "What do you wish me to do for you?" David proposed a plan to discover Saul's intentions. Together, they renewed their oath of friendship. The next day, during the new moon feast, King Saul sat down in his usual place. David was absent, and Saul wondered about his absence. On the second day, Saul confronted Jonathan about David's absence. Jonathan, following his plan with David, explained his friend's absence. Saul's anger erupted, hurling insults at Jonathan. Saul called for David's death, showing his intent to harm anyone protecting him. In a fit of rage, Saul threw a spear at Jonathan. Jonathan, heartbroken by his father's fury, ate nothing on the second day of the feast. His soul was deeply distressed for David because his father had disgraced him. The next morning, Jonathan went out into the field, taking a young man with him. He said to the young man, "Run and find the arrows I will shoot." Jonathan shot an arrow far from where David was hiding. David came out of hiding. He bowed 3 times to Jonathan, prostrating himself. Jonathan, his voice breaking, said to David, "Go in peace." After his painful farewell to Jonathan, David arrived at Nob. Ahimelech met David trembling and asked, "Why do you come alone?" David fabricated a story about a secret mission. David asked Ahimelech if he had any bread. Ahimelech offered holy bread from the tabernacle. David needed a weapon. Ahimelech presented Goliath's sword. David declared, "None like it. Give it to me." David fled to Gath, seeking refuge from Saul's grasp. He sought asylum under King Achish, but his fame preceded him. David's identity became a threat as the servants whispered about him. The servants murmur, calling him a king and recalling his victories. David felt great fear as the rumors spread. Understanding his peril, David plots a desperate ruse. To save his life, he knew he must think swiftly. Panicked, David seeks escape from Philistine hostility. David pretends to be insane in a bid for survival. Achish questions his servants about David's sanity. Achish's incredulity leads to David's release. David escapes Gath, humiliated but alive. Fleeing Gath, David took refuge in the cave of Adullam. His brothers and father's household joined him, seeking protection. News of David's location spread, attracting a diverse group. All who were in distress and debt came to him. David became their captain, a leader of desperate souls. They were not trained warriors, but a collection of outcasts. In his persecution, David stood as a beacon of hope. Concerned for his parents' safety, David made a crucial decision. He left the cave and traveled to Mizpah in Moab. David presented himself before the king of Moab. David asked for a favor to protect his parents. The king granted David's request for refuge. David brought his parents to the Moabite king. They remained safe during David's time in the fortress. As David and his men settled into the fortress, the prophet Gad approached him. God, through his servant, had a message for David. "Do not remain in this refuge," Gad told him. "Go and enter the land of Judah." The divine instruction was clear. David was not to remain in a fixed place. David, ever obedient to God's voice, followed the prophet's advice. He left the fortress of Mizpah in Moab and entered the forest of Hareth. This dense and rugged forest would become his new hiding place. Saul, under a tamarisk tree in Gibeah, grips his spear tightly. He passionately accuses his men of conspiracy against him. Saul laments that no one is loyal and feels betrayed by the bonds between David and Jonathan. Doeg the Edomite steps forward and betrays David. He reveals that Ahimelech aided David with provisions and Goliath's sword. This betrayal sets in motion a tragic fate for Ahimelech and his priests. Doeg's revelation unleashed Saul's uncontrollable fury. Saul summoned Ahimelech and all the priests at Nob. Saul rebuked Ahimelech about David's alleged conspiracy. Ahimelech defended David's innocence and his own. Saul, blinded by paranoia, ordered the priests killed. Doeg attacked the priests, killing 85 men. Saul struck Nob, killing countless innocents. Only Abiathar managed to escape and fled to David. While David and his men were hiding, news reached them. The Philistines were attacking Keilah. Instead of acting impulsively, David consulted the Lord about the attack. The Lord told David to go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. David's men were fearful, doubting their chance against the Philistines. Understanding their fear, David consulted the Lord again, receiving the same reassuring answer. With confidence, they set out to attack the Philistines and protect Keilah. They fought fiercely, defeat the Philistines, and freed the inhabitants of Keilah. David proved once more that he was a liberator, even as a fugitive. When Saul learned that David had entered Keilah, he thought God had delivered him into his hands. Saul quickly called his entire army to go down to Keilah and besiege David and his men. David, aware of the threat with Abiathar the priest by his side, sought divine guidance. The Lord's response was painful but direct. "They will deliver you up." David understood they would betray him to save their own city. Without hesitation, David and his men left Keilah and fled aimlessly. When Saul learned that David had escaped from Keilah, he decided not to attack the city. David and his men wandered through the desert, seeking refuge in the inaccessible places. He was in the wilderness of Ziph, where Saul's pursuit remained relentless. Saul searched for him every day, But God did not deliver David into his hands. In the midst of despair, a light of hope and comfort shone. Jonathan reminded David of God's divine purpose. You will reign over Israel. They sealed their unbreakable covenant of friendship before the Lord. Jonathan returned home, and David remained in the forest, renewed in spirit. David's peace in the desert of Ziph was short-lived. The men of Ziph betrayed him to Saul. They told Saul David was hiding in their land. Saul, pleased by this betrayal, gave them instructions. David and his men withdrew to the desert of Maon. They were now south of Jeshimon, evading Saul. David's leadership was tested in these times of danger. Saul and his men were rapidly approaching, surrounding David in the desert of Maon. Saul was on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other. David hurried to flee. Just when capture seemed inevitable, a messenger rushed to Saul. "Hurry and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land." Faced with this new situation, Saul was forced to halt his pursuit. This place was called the Rock of Flight, for it was where David escaped. David went up from there and lived in the refuges of En-Gedi. If this epic story of King David resonated with you, we invite you to subscribe. By doing so, you're not only supporting us, but you're ensuring you don't miss any of our fascinating videos. Every week, we'll unearth more tales of faith, courage, and miracles. Turn on the bell so YouTube will notify you every time we upload a new video. Join our community and continue exploring the stories that have shaped human history. God bless you.